Good morning. I want to tell you a little bit about a crisis mapping initiative called Quartier par Quartier that I was involved with. And before I do that, I just want to say thank you very much to the Ushahidi Haiti team. Our initiative was unfunded and it was completely grassroots, very ad hoc, and the fact that they promoted it really helped a lot, so I appreciate their support. So Quartier par Quartier was sort of a data model that we were working on where a person in Haiti, and it started with locals on the ground doing community surveys, where a local could go out and sort of do a local census, feed that up to a contact in the diaspora, and that contact in the diaspora would be the dedicated translator and geocoder to be sure that it got into the Ushahidi platform. So what we're talking about here is moving data from sort of an individual momentary incident to being able to talk to a little bit longer temporal resolution, and having data about areas and having demographic data about populations that comes from the local community. Now, the other nice thing about this data model is that it allows you to find hidden populations, which may or may not have the technology to report directly to the Ushahidi platform. So we put this into effect, and much to kind of our surprise, it started to work, and we began to get data in, and it was very fine-scale demographic data and needs assessment data just from the local community. It's not designed to replace large-scale demographic and needs assessments, but it's just that sort of instant, rapid-fire data from the community. But then once we started to try and map it is where we started to run into some problems, and these are our lessons learned. We had two big problems that were really related to the spatial vocabulary and the cartographic vocabulary. Spatial vocabulary is having the same landmarks, that what you call this street is also what I call this street. At the time, OSM didn't have walking papers in Haiti, so we were kind of trying to do our own version of that by shuttling paper maps around. I think in the future, things like walking papers can help obviate this, but it was a real problem for us. But once you do that, once you establish your common landmarks, you still have this problem about how you're going to communicate what you're finding. For me, as a cartographer and a geographer, that meant polygons. This was just the way I'm taught to think. But the platform at that time, and this may be changing, was really only designed to handle point data from individual reports. The surveyors themselves on the ground were communicating with us by drawing lines on a map. Well, points, polygons, and lines are the building block for the cartographic vocabulary. We were all using them in different ways to try and say the same thing. So I think that brings up this issue that a couple speakers have already talked about, and it's how do we develop a common language? And I'm asking the question, do crisis mappers need to come up with a baseline amount of cartographic literacy and sort of some best practices that all of our platforms and all of our products can adhere to? Another issue we had was organizational, and this came in part due to the ad hoc nature of this initiative. We went with what is essentially a flat management structure. And the thing that we learned was that sort of distributed ways of making decisions may be great for collecting data, but it's not necessarily the best way to make decisions about data. When you're crowdsourcing from the affected population, this is important because you're trying to manage expectations. We're all trying to do that anyway in our operations. But when you're doing crowdsourcing, the affected population is also now your data provider. And they're also, hopefully, taking a lot more active involvement in this process. So it's even more important to really manage that relation and be sure that you have good accountability. And a flat management model is a really difficult way to do that. The last thing that we found that was really interesting was there were a lot of people who wanted to try and talk to Quartier par Quartier, but they weren't sure who to talk to. And this is one of the really big mistakes that we made, in part due to the way we had set up our managed structures. We didn't have a single person on the ground. We had a lot of people on the ground, but there wasn't a single person identified to sort of be the face of Quartier par Quartier. And this is important, first of all, because you're moving from asserted geographic information to slightly more validated information, trying to say things about an area. But at the same time, you have logistical and practical reasons that you need someone there to talk to. But don't forget that even though you're physically close to someone and even though you're in a located area, the fastest way to get to the population down the road may be to talk to their cousin in Atlanta. And the really powerful thing about these migrant and diaspora networks is precisely that they're not located anywhere. So I think that tapping into these in the future is going to be a really important way to get data. And even though you need to have somebody there on the ground, don't forget that these networks spread over much larger geographical areas than just where the event is happening. So these were the issues that I felt were real stumbling blocks for us, and it was really frustrating because while I think it was a really successful effort, it only kind of half worked. We got the data, but we weren't able to map it in the way we would liked. But the really, so far, positive thing about just the last 24 hours of being here is listening to how many people are working on the same issues. And I think that together as a community we can move forward, and that crisis mapping can be something that helps communities. Thank you very much.